in chapter 10 of Political Treatise by Baruch Spinoza, Baruch talks about democracy. And much of what he talks about is common knowledge, is what we know today. He comes from a different era, of course, when he was alive. I think much of the world didn't practice democracy. It was a new idea at that point. Of course, if we go far much back, then democracy was also practiced, of course, in ancient Greece and Rome. But anyway, in the recent past, we can consider that it was a new idea that was coming along. Now, besides giving us what you can consider to be common knowledge today about democracy, he does also become very controversial. During his time, I don't think it was controversial to say the things he says in that chapter. And it's about women and democracy, women and voting. So this is what he says. But perhaps someone will ask whether women are under men's authority by nature or institution. And in fact, in the same chapter, he did describe who should vote. And he talks of the person who bears allegiance to the laws of the country, so they are not a foreigner. The person who is independent, and the independence here describes you are not a woman, and you are not a child, and you are not a slave. And it talks about you not being a criminal, basically being found to be a criminal. So he gives those three. Now he goes to the last section of the chapter. That's where now he talks about specifically about women. And I think, even though I'm saying maybe it wasn't controversial during that time, I think he felt that it could be controversial, because while he doesn't talk about the others, he focuses so much on this. And I think maybe there was a debate going on during that time about women voting in a democracy. And that is what he says, that someone will ask whether women are under men's authority by nature or by institution. So that's the question he tries to answer. Are women under men's authority by nature, or through an institution, or something some people call it a social construct? Is it a social construct, or is nature? For if it has been by mere institution, then we had no reason compelling us to exclude women from government. So he says, if it is by institution, if it is a social construct, then we don't have any reason why we should exclude women from running government or being part of government. But if we consult experience itself, we shall find that the origin of it is in their weakness. Now, that's where it starts being very controversial. For there has been never a case of men and women reigning together. But wherever on earth men are found, there we see that men rule and women are ruled. And that on this plan, both sexes live harmony. So it's kind of making the point that looking around, he thinks that every society that has existed has always been the men rule and the women are ruled, and he thinks that brings harmony in the society. But when I reached that point, I started reading Herodotus' histories, and Herodotus talks about the Amazons, which was a society of where women led, women were warriors and women were the leaders. And in fact, as it was coming to my mind, he mentions the Amazons. But now the things he says about the Amazon is not exactly what Herodotus describes in his book histories. He must have had his other sources. I'm talking about Baruch here, or both of them. The two had different sources about the Amazons. And we can understand that Herodotus wrote about the Amazons thousands of years before. Anyways, he continues to say, but on the other hand, the Amazons, who are reported to have held rule of old, did not suffer men to stop in their country, but reared only their female children, killing males to whom they gave birth. Now, Baruch says that the Amazon women killed their boys. But the story that Herodotus gives is somehow different. In fact, Herodotus says what happened is the Amazon had a society like any other, which was like any other, where the men ruled and the women were ruled. But what happened is that there is another society that came and conquered them and killed all the men and made the women, enslaved the women basically. And while they were transporting the women to a different location, the women revolted and overpowers the soldiers and killed them, and then they went and established a new society. And because there were no more men amongst them, then they had to take up the roles that usually were for the men, and that society grew like that. And even when boys came along, because he does talk of them having associations with people men from other communities around, the men came to a society where women were powerful, women held political office, and then that society kind of moved like that. But Baruch talks of them killing boys. I don't know his sources. I'm not as well read as Baruch was, so I can't claim that he's wrong or right. I don't know. He continues to say, but if by nature women were equal to men and were equally distinguished by force of character and ability, in which human power and therefore human right chiefly consist, surely among nations so many of different some will be found, where both sexes rule alike, and others where men are ruled by women and so brought up what they can make less use of their ability. So he says, if we're going to say that men and women are equal in terms of everything else that makes people have political authority, then he says, then we should have seen societies where the societies around would have been mixed. In some societies, women would be more powerful than men, and in some men more powerful than. That's the argument he makes anyways. And he continues to say, and since this is nowhere the case, one may assert with perfect propriety that women have not by nature equal right to men, but that they necessarily give away to men, and thus it cannot happen that both sexes should rule alike, much less that men should be ruled by women. But if we further reflect upon human passions, now men in fact generally love women merely from the passion of lust, and esteem their cleverness and wisdom in the proportion to the excellence of their beauty, and also how very ill-disposed men are so suffer the women they love to show any sort of favor to others, and other facts of this kind, we shall easily see that men and women cannot rule alike without great hurt to peace. But of this enough. So in fact, that's where the book ends. So that very last part of Baruch Spinoza's Political Treatise is very controversial, you will agree. It comes from maybe 300 years, 400 years ago, and there were ways people thought then. We mostly don't think the same today, and yeah, today we have countries led by women. It's not something that it's not something alien to modern society that women hold political office with same ability as to men. We have presidents and prime ministers and ministers and CEOs and all these people. So, but that's how Baruch saw the world in his time. Yeah.